based on abundance. Now, it all sounds quite good, and we would like to say, oh, we're all on the abundance train. But the reality is, our culture, the political system, the economic system, social values are all based on scarcity. And scarcity, think of it this way. If you have abundance, what do? You have your hands out like this because you're going to give, you're going to share the abundance you have, right? What do you do with scarcity? You grab on. You hang on to what you have. And you don't want anybody to get it. So, of course, you go into the parking lot of Myers and you lock your door. Because somebody might come and take something from your car. You could look at it in all kinds of different ways, how we function out of a mindset of scarcity. We don't have enough. And it's not just in our culture. It's churches as well operate out of that perspective, that mindset. So the first lesson from Isaiah begins this journey. And by the way, Ron did a marvelous job in starting the reading by saying, "Oh!" Because that reading really was a wake-up call. It was directed to the children of Israel, some of them, who were in exile in Babylon. In 2nd Isaiah, which this concludes 2nd Isaiah chapter 40 through 55, was a wake-up call to a group of people who were despondent and despairing because they had been taken captive into another land. And so Isaiah starts saying, we're going to go back home. And it's going to be wonderful. And what do they say? Oh, but everybody has taken over our land. Everything is destroyed. The crops have not been yielding because nobody is there to take care of it. All of these negative scarcity sort of things, right? And Isaiah says, God is a God of abundance. Come to the table. Come to feast at the abundance that God will provide. Now, it sounds great, but it's not easy to do that when your mindset is all based on scarcity. So, we get to the gospel reading, and it's even more profoundly a story about abundance. It begins with, now when Jesus heard this, what had Jesus heard? Anybody remember the story? Anybody read chapter 14, the first part of it? What was it?
They all came. There were people?
Well, no.
Oh. Guessing.
What Jesus heard was that John the Baptist, who was his cousin, at least according to Luke's version, had been executed by Herod. That's not very good news. And Herod was threatened by Jesus because of what Jesus was doing and the following he was getting. And he said, John the Baptist has come back to life. That's why he could do all of this. Herod was threatened, and Herod wanted Jesus out of the way. So when Jesus hears this, what does he do? He withdraws from there to a deserted place. The word withdraw occurred, the Hebrew, the Greek word occurred in chapter 2 of Matthew. Anybody remember what happens in chapter 2 of Matthew? It's the birth story, right, of Matthew. And what happens? The Magi come to Jerusalem and ask, where is this born new king to be born? And then they have a dream. And what do they do after the dream? They withdraw to go to Bethlehem. Later in the story, Joseph hears that Herod is going to come after him. What does he do? He withdraws to Egypt. And then again, when they're going to return back home from Egypt, he hears that Herod's son is in power and he has the same designs. He withdraws to Galilee. That term withdraw is always a signal that things are dangerous. So, Jesus withdraws to a lonely place. Now, why? Was he afraid? Was he needing some R&R time? It's not clear. But the situation was one that was ominous. So he wanted to be alone. He gets in a boat, goes to the place that he wants to be alone, and what does he encounter?
A huge
crowd. A huge crowd. Man, if I was in the boat, I'd have turned around midway in the lake, gone to a different place. But he comes ashore, and then what are we told about Jesus? He has compassion on the crowd. That is a powerful word of compassion. Compassion means the ability to put yourself in the place of the other person. And it's a theme that comes out time after time about Jesus in his relationship with the people. He has compassion on them. And in his compassion, he ministers to them. He heals them. He shares stories with them. And this goes on all day long. And then finally it's getting a little dark. Now, here's the crunch about scarcity. What did the disciples do? Send them home. We can't deal with this big crowd anymore. That's scarcity, isn't it? We can't handle it. Send them home so they can buy their own food. And then Jesus says, out of abundance, he says, feed them. What? How are we going to feed this big crowd? And there's the scarcity thing. All we have is a little bit. We can't share that with this big crowd. And then Jesus says, well, just have them sit down. And we'll see about that. And then the words are the same words for the Eucharist. 4 words. What are they? Take. You take bread. You bless it. You break it. And you give it. Isn't that what we do when we have Eucharist? The same words that Jesus does with the 5 loaves and the fish. And how big a crowd is it? There might might be a little bit of exaggeration here, but it's a big crowd, 5,000 people plus. It probably wasn't that big, but it was a big crowd. And they are satisfied, and they gather 12 baskets full of the remains. This is a gospel story about abundance. And it challenges us to look at how do we operate our lives. Do we live out of a mindset of scarcity? And there's all kinds of pressure in our society to do that. From the top down, from the president down to the daily lives we have, it's all about scarcity. And scarcity breeds fear. Or do we operate out of an attitude of abundance? And it relates to not only how we daily live our lives, but it also relates to how we function as a faith community. How many times have you heard people from a church, not maybe just this church, but any church, oh, we're so small, and oh, we don't have enough money for that, and oh, we can't do that, and we can't do that. Heard that? That's the scarcity. That's the model of scarcity. But that's not what Jesus was about. It's not what God is about. God is God of an abundance. And so this is an invitation for us just to look at our lives and look how we function in our day-to-day lives and how we function as a faith community. Amen.